John and Sarah had always dreamed of starting a family. They were young, in love, and ready to build a life together. John, a hard-working man with a steady job, and Sarah, a kind and caring woman, had been married for a few years when they decided it was time to have children. They were excited, nervous, and full of hope as they imagined the future with little feet running around their home. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, both of them couldn't believe it. They were overjoyed. Their friends and family congratulated them, and everyone eagerly awaited the arrival of their little one. John couldn't help but think about the day he finally held his baby in his arms. Sarah, too, felt excited and a bit nervous. Being a new mom was something she had always dreamed of, and now it was finally happening. Months passed, and the day came when Sarah went into labor. John was by her side, holding her hand and reassuring her through every wave of pain. After hours of waiting, the doctor announced that Sarah had given birth to triplets. John's eyes widened with surprise. He had always imagined having one child, maybe two at most, but three? It was a big shock for both of them. The doctor and nurses congratulated them, but John felt overwhelmed, unsure of how he would manage to take care of three babies. The babies were all healthy and beautiful, each of them crying loudly as they took their first breaths. But as John looked down at the three tiny faces, something felt off. The babies had darker skin tones, unlike his own fair complexion. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. After all, babies often look different from their parents when they were born, right? But as the days went by, John's confusion grew. He started noticing more differences that didn't make sense to him. The baby's features didn't resemble his, and the thought began to eat away at him. Could they really be his? His mind raced with doubts and questions. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah, on the other hand, noticed the change in John. He wasn't as excited as he had been before, and he seemed distant. The joy they once shared was now replaced with an uncomfortable silence. Sarah tried to reassure him, but John's mind was clouded with uncertainty. "They're ours, John," she said one night, holding the babies close. "They're yours too, I swear." But John couldn't believe her. The more he looked at the babies, the more he questioned everything. Was it possible that Sarah had been unfaithful? Could she have cheated on him? The thoughts swirled in his mind, and he began to pull away from Sarah and the babies. His love for them, once so strong, now seemed distant. The thought of betrayal took root in his heart, and soon the decision was made. John asked Sarah to leave. He told her that he couldn't handle the situation, that he needed time to think, to figure things out. Sarah was heartbroken. She begged him to understand, to trust her, but John's doubts had taken over. With no other choice, Sarah packed up the babies and left, unsure of what would happen next. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. John's life was no longer filled with the joy and excitement he had imagined when he first found out Sarah was pregnant. The house was quiet without the sound of crying babies or Sarah's laughter. He had convinced himself that what he was doing was right. He believed he was protecting himself from the pain of betrayal, but deep down, a small part of him missed the family they had once been. Sarah, meanwhile, was struggling with the reality of the situation. She had left everything behind, including John, and was now raising the triplets alone. The babies were growing fast, and they needed so much from her, but there was an emptiness in her heart. She couldn't believe how quickly things had changed. One moment, they were happily married, waiting for their babies to arrive. And the next, she was a single mother with no support. Despite the challenges, Sarah tried her best to be strong. She gave the triplets all the love she had, but it was hard. John's rejection hurt her deeply, and she wondered every day if he would ever come back to her. She couldn't understand how he could doubt her, but she knew she had to move forward for the sake of the children. They needed her, and she would always be there for them. John, on the other hand, was growing more distant and uncertain. At first, he had thought the baby's appearance was just a coincidence. But as time went on, the doubt began to grow. He found himself wondering if Sarah had really been truthful with him. Could she have lied? Could she have had an affair? The thought was unbearable, but the confusion in his mind made it hard to let go of. John began to tell himself that the truth must be out there somewhere, that he just had to find it. He told himself that if he could figure out the mystery, everything would make sense again. He kept thinking about the moment when the babies were born, how everything had seemed so perfect, and then suddenly it all changed. The questions haunted him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been wronged. He tried to keep busy, throwing himself into work and other distractions, but his thoughts always returned to Sarah and the triplets. He missed them. He missed Sarah's warmth, the way she had always taken care of him. He missed the laughter they had shared, the simple moments of happiness they had enjoyed together. But at the same time, the doubt never fully went away. Months passed, and John's heart began to harden. The anger he felt towards Sarah for what he thought was a betrayal turned into a wall he couldn't break down. He refused to talk to her, even though deep down, he knew he was punishing her for something she may not have even done. Sarah's life was moving forward, but it was hard. She missed John too, but she couldn't make him understand. She couldn't change his mind. She had no choice but to raise the triplets on her own, hoping that one day things would get better, and maybe, just maybe, John would realize the truth. As time went on, Sarah's patience grew thin. She couldn't wait forever, and she knew that if she didn't focus on her children, they would suffer. She had to be strong for them. But part of her still held on to the hope that John would come back. After all, they were still a family, weren't they? Sarah woke up to the soft sound of her children calling her from the other room. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the tiredness. It had been another long night, and the weight of being the single mother was always heavy on her shoulders. But the triplets needed her, and she would never let them down. She hurried to the kitchen, preparing breakfast as fast as she could. The triplets, Michael, Olivia, and Jacob, were already up, bouncing around with their usual energy. Sarah smiled as she set their plates on the table, trying to stay positive despite the challenges. Her life had completely changed since she left John. It wasn't easy being a mother to 3 children, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. She had to be their rock, their source of strength. It wasn't just the physical challenges that wore her down. The emotional weight was even harder to carry. She missed John. She missed the man she once loved, the man who had promised to be there for her and the children. But now, after all the pain and confusion, Sarah was trying to accept that things might never be the same again. There were days when she felt completely alone, as if she were carrying the world on her shoulders. There were no phone calls from John, no offers of help. She had to handle everything by herself. Doctor's appointments, shopping, school events, and most of all, the constant care the triplets needed. They were growing fast, and each day brought new challenges. Despite everything, Sarah never gave up. She did her best to give the triplets a loving home. She watched as they learned to walk, talk, and grow into their own little personalities. Michael was the quiet one, always thinking before he spoke. Olivia was full of energy, always running around, asking endless questions. Jacob was the mischievous one, always finding ways to make Sarah laugh, even when she was feeling at her lowest. They were her world, and they gave her the strength to keep going, even when things seemed impossible. There were times when Sarah would cry at night, missing the life she had once shared with John. She had so many unanswered questions. Why had he rejected her? Why hadn't he believed her when she told him the babies were his? But those questions couldn't change anything. All she could do was focus on the children and keep moving forward. They needed her, and she would always be there for them. As the days turned into years, Sarah learned how to manage her new life. She found a routine that worked, but the emptiness of her marriage still lingered. She kept the triplets' pictures on the wall, and every so often, she would remind them that John was their father, even if he wasn't there. She didn't want them to grow up with a sense of abandonment. But Sarah also knew that she couldn't let the past hold her back. She had to be strong for the triplets. No matter what happened with John, they needed her to be the best mother she could be. And so, she pushed through every day, with hope that one day, the truth would come to light. And maybe, just maybe, John would come back to them. 10 years had passed since Sarah left John. Life had moved on in many ways. The triplets were now 10 years old, full of energy, and curious about everything around them. They had grown so much in those years, and Sarah had worked hard to raise them with love and care. Despite the challenges, she always tried to provide them with a sense of stability and happiness. But there was one thing Sarah couldn't ignore: the questions the triplets had been asking. They were old enough now to understand that John, their father, wasn't in their lives. They had heard stories about him from other family members, but they didn't understand why he had never really been a part of their lives. Sarah had always tried to explain, but she knew there was so much more to the story than they realized. One evening, as Sarah was putting the kids to bed, Olivia, the most inquisitive of the triplets, asked a question that Sarah had been dreading. "Mom, why did Dad leave us?" Olivia's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that hit Sarah hard. The other two triplets, Michael and Jacob, looked up at their mom with curious eyes, waiting for an answer. Sarah sighed deeply, trying to find the right words. She had always wanted to protect her children from the pain of the past, but she knew it was time to share the truth, or at least part of it. "Your dad, he had some doubts when you were born," she began carefully. "He didn't understand why you looked different, and he started to believe things that weren't true." The triplets listened intently, but Sarah could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't fully understand, and Sarah knew it would be a long time before they could truly grasp everything that had happened. The next day, Sarah received a phone call. It was from an unknown number, but something in her gut told her it was important. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sarah," the voice on the other end said. It was John. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him in years, and his voice was just as familiar as she remembered. But there was something different in it this time, something that made Sarah pause. "I have something to tell you," John continued. "I've learned the truth about everything." Sarah's mind raced. Could it be? Was he finally ready to hear her side of the story? She took a deep breath and asked, "What do you mean, John?" John explained that he had recently found out about a mistake at the fertility clinic they had used during their attempt to get pregnant. Apparently, there had been a mix-up, and the sperm that had fertilized Sarah's eggs had come from a different donor, not him. The triplets weren't biologically his. At first, Sarah didn't know how to respond. The shock of hearing this after all these years left her speechless. John continued, his voice tinged with regret. "I didn't know. I didn't know about the mix-up. I thought you had been unfaithful, and I made the biggest mistake of my life." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about the truth being revealed. It was about the understanding that had been missing all this time. The burden of the years of confusion and heartache was finally beginning to lift. "I should have trusted you," John said, his voice full of regret. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." For a moment, Sarah didn't know what to say. She had waited so long to hear these words, but now that they were out in the open, she wasn't sure where to go from here. But as she listened to John, she realized that this was a step forward. It wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something new. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. John sat in his office, staring at the phone in his hand. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. For 10 years, he had carried around the belief that Sarah had betrayed him. He had pushed her away, refused to listen to her, and closed his heart to the very people he should have loved the most. But now, everything was changing. The truth was finally out. The triplets weren't biologically his, but they were still his children in every other way that mattered. The mix-up at the fertility clinic was the reason for the confusion, not Sarah's actions. John had never known about it. He had let anger and doubt cloud his judgment, leading him to make decisions that had cost him precious years of his life. He put the phone down slowly and ran his hands through his hair. A heavy weight sat on his chest, and for the first time in a long time, John felt the sting of regret. How could he have doubted Sarah so easily? How could he have thrown away everything they had built together? Over the past few days, John had done a lot of thinking. He had reached out to the fertility clinic and confirmed that the mistake had indeed happened. It wasn't Sarah's fault. She had done nothing wrong. But he had been too quick to judge her, too quick to walk away from his family. The realization hit him hard, and he knew there was only one thing left to do: make things right. John needed to speak to Sarah. He needed to apologize for everything he had put her through. He needed to face his mistakes and hope that she could somehow find it in her heart to forgive him. He picked up the phone again, his finger hovering over her number. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding this. He had to own up to his mistakes. When Sarah answered the phone, her voice sounded tired but calm. "Hello, Sarah, it's me, John," he said, his voice full of emotion. I don't know where to begin." Sarah paused for a moment, and John could hear her breathing. "What is it, John?" "I'm sorry," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "I've made so many mistakes. I never should have doubted you. You didn't deserve any of what I put you through. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was wrong. You were always telling me the truth, and I couldn't see it. I should have trusted you from the beginning." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. John waited, unsure of what Sarah would say. He had no right to expect anything from her, but he had to say what was in his heart. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I don't know, John. It's been a long time. The hurt runs deep." John understood. He knew he couldn't fix everything in one conversation, but he was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild their relationship, to make things right for the sake of the triplets. "I know I can't erase the past," he said softly, "but I want to be a part of their lives again. I want to make it up to you, Sarah, and to our children. Please give me a chance." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then finally she sighed. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet, John, but I'm willing to talk. That's a start, right?" John felt a small spark of hope in his chest. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The truth had come out, and maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days after their phone call felt strange for both John and Sarah. There was a heavy silence between them, but at the same time, an unspoken understanding began to form. John had apologized, and though Sarah had said she wasn't ready to forgive him just yet, the conversation had sparked something in her, a small glimmer of hope. John spent the following days thinking about what he could do to show Sarah that he was serious about making things right. He didn't want to just apologize over the phone and then disappear again. He knew that actions spoke louder than words, and he was determined to prove that he could be the person he should have been all along. One evening, after much thought, John decided to visit Sarah. He knew it was a risk. She had been through so much already, and he didn't want to pressure her. But he couldn't wait any longer to see her, to tell her in person how sorry he was for everything. He picked up a bouquet of flowers, a simple gesture to show that he cared, and drove to Sarah's house. His heart raced as he parked outside, unsure of what to expect. Would she even let him in? Would she be willing to talk? Taking a deep breath, John walked to the front door and rang the bell. The sound echoed in the quiet of the evening, and within moments, Sarah opened the door. She looked surprised to see him, but there was no anger in her eyes, just a cautious curiosity. "Hi," John said softly, holding out the flowers. "I know it's been a long time, but I wanted to say how sorry I am. For everything. I've been thinking a lot, and I realize how much I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm hoping we can talk." Sarah looked at the flowers, then back at John. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, and motioned for him to come in. John entered, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea where the conversation would lead, but he was ready to face whatever came. As they sat down, Sarah remained quiet for a while, her hands folded in her lap. John didn't rush her. He waited patiently, giving her space to decide what to say. Finally, Sarah spoke. "You were right, John. I should have told you the truth sooner, but it wasn't just about the babies. It was about trust. I trusted you with everything. Our lives, our family. And when you left, it felt like you had taken that trust and thrown it away." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I was wrong," he said. "I let my doubts and fears control me, and I didn't see what was really happening. I thought I was protecting myself, but in reality, I was hurting both of us. I'm so sorry for that." For a long moment, there was silence. Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. "It's going to take time, John. I can't just forget everything, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. But I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you admitting your mistakes." John felt a sense of relief wash over him. This wasn't an easy road, but at least it was a start. The past couldn't be undone, but perhaps with time, they could rebuild. And for the first time in years, John felt like he had a chance to fix the broken pieces of his family, even if it meant taking things slowly. "I don't want to rush anything, Sarah," John said. "I'll take it one step at a time. I just want to be there for you and the kids, if you'll let me." Sarah gave him a small, unsure smile. "We'll see. But you've taken the first step, and that's something." As they continued talking, John realized that the road ahead would not be easy. But the fact that Sarah was willing to talk, to give him a chance, was more than he could have hoped for. And with that, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. Weeks passed since John's visit to Sarah's house. He had been consistent in showing up, offering help with the triplets, and proving through his actions that he truly wanted to be part of their lives again. But despite his efforts, Sarah still kept a distance. She was willing to talk, but her trust had been broken so deeply that it couldn't be fixed in a day. John understood. He had made too many mistakes to expect everything to be okay immediately. But he kept trying. Every time he saw Sarah, he showed her kindness, respect, and patience. Slowly, the tension began to ease, though Sarah remained cautious. She wasn't ready to fully open her heart to him just yet, and John knew he had to accept that. One Saturday afternoon, John received a call from Sarah. She wanted to meet him at the park to talk about something. John's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what this meant, but he was willing to take any opportunity to show her he was serious about repairing their relationship. At the park, John found Sarah sitting on a bench, the triplets running around nearby, playing with a soccer ball. The sight brought a smile to his face. The kids had grown so much, and he felt a pang of regret for all the time he had missed with them. "Hi," Sarah said when she saw him approaching. Her voice was warm, but there was still an edge to it. She had made progress, but the wounds from the past weren't completely healed. "Hi," John replied softly, sitting beside her on the bench. He looked at the triplets, who were laughing and kicking the ball back and forth. They didn't seem to notice their parents sitting there, but John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. These were his children, and despite everything, they had turned out well. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, looking out at the children. "I've been thinking about how much time we've lost, not just with each other, but with them." John nodded, understanding the pain in her voice. I know I can never make up for the years we lost, but I want to try. I want to be there for them, for you." Sarah turned to him, her eyes soft but serious. "It's not just about being there, John. It's about trust. I can't just forget how you treated me, how you walked away without listening to me. But I also know that you're trying now, and that matters. I'm just not sure if I can fully open up again." John took a deep breath. "I understand. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know it's going to take time. But I want to do whatever it takes to rebuild. I don't want to live with the regret of not trying." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Finally, she sighed. "I can't promise things will go back to the way they were. But maybe we can start fresh. For the kids, at least." John felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was enough to keep going. He had done the hard work of owning up to his mistakes, and now Sarah was willing to take the first step toward healing. "I'll take that," John said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time." As they sat there together, watching the triplets play, John realized that rebuilding a broken family wasn't easy. But it was possible. With time, patience, and effort, the wounds could heal. It wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, John believed that they could make it work. And as Sarah glanced at him, a small, hopeful smile tugged at her lips. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. It had been a few months since that day in the park when Sarah and John decided to give their relationship another chance. Things were not perfect, but they were better. They were talking more, working together for the sake of the triplets, and slowly, very slowly, rebuilding the trust that had been broken all those years ago. John was doing everything he could to show Sarah that he was serious about being there for her and the children. He spent more time with the triplets, helping with their schoolwork, taking them to their sports practices, and even helping Sarah with the daily chores. The kids, especially Michael, Olivia, and Jacob, seemed to warm up to him again. They could see that their father was trying, and little by little, they started to accept him back into their lives. At the same time, Sarah was still cautious. She had forgiven him to some extent, but old wounds took time to heal. She knew she couldn't just erase the hurt she had felt, but she also realized that holding onto the past too tightly would only keep her from moving forward. For the first time in years, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their family could be whole again. One Saturday afternoon, John invited Sarah to join him and the kids for a picnic at their favorite park. He had been planning this for days, wanting to do something special to show how much he appreciated their effort to rebuild. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was willing to work for it. When Sarah arrived, she was surprised by the effort John had put into making the picnic perfect. There was a blanket spread out on the grass, a basket filled with sandwiches and fruit, and the kids running around, laughing and playing. It looked like a scene from the past, when everything had been simple and happy. "This looks great, John," Sarah said, smiling softly as she sat down on the blanket. "You really thought of everything." John smiled back, feeling a warmth in his chest. "I wanted to do something nice. I know it's not easy, but I'm glad we're here together." The triplets ran over to join them, excited for the picnic. Michael plopped down beside Sarah, handing her a sandwich, while Olivia and Jacob started talking about their latest school projects. For a moment, everything felt normal again. They were just a family. No mistakes, no regrets, just a family enjoying each other's company. As the afternoon went on, Sarah found herself relaxing. She could see the effort John was making, not just for her, but for the kids too. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. There were still things they needed to work through, but the foundation was there. Trust was being rebuilt, and slowly, love was starting to return. Later in the day, as they were packing up, Sarah looked at John and said, "Thank you for this. I think we're getting there." John's heart lifted. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said, "but we're in this together. All of us." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The past could never be erased, but it didn't have to define them. They were building something new, a family reborn. As they drove home, the triplets in the backseat, laughing and chatting, John and Sarah exchanged a quiet glance. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. they were a family again.